myself as always, Corey. Welcome y'all. Thanks for coming out on this dark night to celebrate the darkness. It's my pleasure to introduce to you a friend and fellow poet, Andrew McFadyen-Ketchum. He is an award-winning poet, editor, ghostwriter, activist, and meanderer. He is acquisitions editor for Upper Rubber Boot Books, founder and editor of PoemOfTheWeek.com, founder and editor of the Floodgate Poetry Series, professor of creative writing.
It's still true.
Okay, sorry.
I haven't quite made my exit yet.
Okay. And professor of creative writing at Colorado Community College. He is the author of the book Ghost Gear, which will be featured as part of the storytelling poetry thing that he and his father, Steve, are going to perform for you tonight. Dr. Steve McFadyen-Ketchum, better known as Dr. Steve, is a theoretical scientist, storyteller, and activist. He was a conscientious objector during Vietnam, and somehow, Andrew says, managed to father a very tall giant. So they're going to talk through a story behind one of the poems, and I'll let them take over the explanation of that and the storytelling. So help me welcome Andrew and Steve.
Don't forget your wine, Corey.
Yeah.
All right.
How much fun that'd be if I would drink something.
Oh man, what's going on, everybody?
Hey.
What do you know? It's the winter eve solstice, and it's rainy and horrible and dreary, and there are a lot of you here, and I'm kind of blown away. Thank you.
Woo!
I know a lot of you came from Nashville, and when me and my dad were talking about coming out here, my mom came up and said, you know, it's going to take like 2.5 hours. And I was like, oh God, they're so old. It's not going to take 2.5 hours. It took 2.5 hours. So it's a very good thing that we left when we did. Very excited to share this with you. So this is the book that I wrote. And central to this book are 5 what we call father story poems. All right? And what this means is, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, in Sylvan Park, and if you know Sylvan Park now, you go, ooh, that means they come from money. No, it don't mean that at all. Back in the day, it was a very, very rough place to grow up, and it was quite an experience. And my father is this amazing storyteller, which you're about to find out. And he, when I was a kid, his big thing was like at birthdays and weddings and honestly just whenever he could do it, because he loves to do it, he would gather up everybody and he would tell a story. And his stories tended to come from his childhood. He was a military kid, grew up in Louisiana, a little bit in London, all over the place. Not in London, in England. And he grew up in these rural environments, and he would go out and do this daring do and somehow survive. So he would tell these stories of a rural survival, and they really fueled my urban survival. Because growing up in that neighborhood, it was survival. It wasn't fun. It was difficult. And there's some people in this room who know what I'm talking about. And so these stories really became like super central to who I am. And what we're about to share with you is like, it's not just poetry, it's not just storytelling, it's deep. All right, and so when I was in graduate school, trying to being a poet, whatever the hell that means, I was trying to figure out what am I going to write about. I didn't really know. And one day, I stumbled upon. I'd always wanted to write my father's stories, and we in fact had tried. You remember, we sat down and we tried to write them out, and it just didn't work as prose. It just didn't work. And then one day in graduate school, I started to write the first father story poem, which is the title of the book, Ghost Gear. The title poem is Ghost Gear. And it's about my dad when he was, 17, 18?
19.
19. That would be 1966.
1803.
1803. That's actually my joke. You totally just stole my joke from me. So this was 1966.
Thereabouts.
Ish. Okay. And he was fishing with his father, a commercial fisherman, out on the Aleutian Chain, Alaska. And long story short, he was out there, way out, gathering fish, and this tidal wave came and nearly drowned him, and he survived. And I wrote this poem, and I'll never forget in graduate school, everybody so far had been like, so we let you into this program, and we're kind of wondering why. And they read this poem, and they kind of went, okay, like you've got something here. And I realized I had this idea that I could versify my father's stories. What was special about it for me was it wasn't just, here's my dad doing this, here's my dad doing that. It was a versification of the story and also the story of watching him tell the stories. And so this became the backbone of the book. So there's these 5 father story poems in which I tell the story of watching him tell the story and tell the story of this, right? So about a year ago, this book came out in 2014. About a year ago, I realized, I really want to start recording these more stories. He's got tons. He told me a story today I've never heard. Wasn't very good, but but I realized I really wanted to get these down on I don't really want to write the poems anymore because, man, they're hard to write. I got other things to write now, but I really wanted to get them down, and so I started this YouTube playlist called There I Was, I think this is right. There I was, my father tells the stories behind Ghost Gear and Other Tall Tales. And so we've got 3 episodes up there now. If you go to my website, andrewmk.com, it's very easy to find. And this is our first live performance of episode 4 of Lost Creek. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to my dad, Dr. Steve McFadyen-Ketchum. Give him a big round of applause.
I've never done this before, so
Well, he's.
hold on to your seats.
Do you have your drink? Where's your drink?
You're going to get me one.
Well, you had a drink, didn't you? Okay, I'm going to get you a drink.
I need a drink.
I thought you had a drink. So there are a couple of rules. Well, there's really only one rule, and that is that we have to have a drink. Okay. Order.
This is me.
No, that's me. Well, this is you.
This is me.
All right.
Aww.
So
There we
we
were.
were.
He was 16,
We're 17.
17. I was whatever I was, and at the time, and it's been a while ago. And I and my friend John had been fishing the creeks and streams of Tennessee, and we'd been caving, going into these caves and exploring and so on and so forth. I've gotten old enough now where I don't really want to do this anymore. But,
It's very frustrating, actually.
but back for him, yeah. But for back then, I found it very exciting, and I thought, well, I should take my children. So I did with him when he was starting maybe 5 or 6 or 7. We had a strap device around him, so back then he was this tall. And I would hold on to it, and when we would come to the big rocks, I would just hoist him over the rocks. By the way, I was very buff back then. Not now.
That's where I get it from.
And so there we were in Lost Creek Cave, which is near Sparta. Anybody know this cave? Anybody
I've
know
been
where
there.
Sparta is?
You're kidding.
Sparta,
You know-
Tennessee?
You
Yeah.
know Lost Creek Cave?
All right.
Wow.
All right.
I
Well,
like caving too.
you can refer to the
Fantastic.
experts here on more details later. Anyway, it's a big sinkhole. Tennessee is limestone, and the water erodes and produces these. This was a big sinkhole.
Big sinkhole.
Maybe, I don't know,
500 feet across, 1,000 feet across.
not that big, but big. And there's a waterfall at one end where the creek comes in from above, so maybe 40, 50 feet up. And there's this lovely waterfall that dries up in the summer, often, but in the winter it's running. And it runs down to the bottom of this sinkhole, and you walk your way down. And the entrance is over here. So the water has flown over the millennia this way, and then in a big circle underground. That's what makes this cave particularly lovely for people who love this sort of thing. It's a very big cave.
I'm gonna interrupt. So
Yeah,
the
go
reason
ahead.
it's called Lost Creek Cave is the creek is called Lost Creek. So most waterfalls, there's a cliff, the water falls down, it makes a pool, and then the water trickles off somewhere. In this case, it just goes straight down. So it's a lost creek.
Yeah.
So on one end you've got this cliff, water it doesn't go anywhere, and on the other end over here, 500,000 feet, whatever. Maybe actually, I think it's not. It's
Well,
like
whatever,
250
whatever.
feet.
Yeah.
Over here is this giant cave opening, right? So it's called Lost Creek Cave for that reason.
Exactly so.
Okay,
So
continue.
you go in the entrance of the cave. It's a very big cave.
Yeah, real big. It's not.
So you're not squeezing through
Easy.
narrow places. And it coils around like a ram's horn. It curves to the right and down, back on itself, and there's another waterfall underground.
Which
So
is
we thought it
very
would be
unique.
cool.
This is very unusual.
Yeah.
So what happens is above ground the water falls, it pools, and it keeps falling, and you go down and down and down this cave, and at the end of the cave is a waterfall. It's just not that common. Amy, I think you just need to unscrew one of the arms, and then you can adjust it.
It just went dark, so we didn't know if we were
it's
still
fine.
recording.
It's fine. It's
Okay.
fine.
It's fine.
So at the bottom of the cave, at the very end of the cave, is another waterfall. And in theory, underneath that is,
Who knows?
if you found you could go forever into the gyre, right? Right. So we had this idea,
that we would camp in the cave.
and so every year we used to do this thing that we called the FYAO camping trip, which stands for Freeze Your Ass Off Camping Trip. And I don't really. And actually, this is I still do this. I camp usually in February. Just because nobody's around when you go camping in February. So we had this Freeze Your Ass Off trip. It was me, you, John Interlandy, his best friend, and one of my best friends. He's like my other dad. We did all these adventures together. And then it would be like a friend of mine. In this case, it was Peter. And usually we would go somewhere and set up a tent and all this stuff. Well, that gets kind of old because in February there's this thing called snow and rain, and it's really cold. And we've been going to this cave for years, and so we determined we're gonna freeze our asses off in a cave. We can just go in and it'll be simple enough. And we thought it'd be really nice, we can have this waterfall side campsite in the center of the earth. It seemed like a good idea
At the time.
at the time.
Yeah.
And so we decided to have our freeze your ass off trip
And we went.
at the bottom of this cave. And so there we were.
There we were.
We checked the weather.
It was raining.
It was gonna be raining a little, but it should, whatever. So we went to the cave, and so this time it was me, Dad, John, and Peter Wyatt, who I've known since kindergarten.
Yes.
Yeah, I've known since kindergarten, so a little while now. And we brought our lanterns with us and our food, and I think we're gonna stay 2 nights. It was gonna be a pretty quick trip. So
There we were.
There we were.
And the cave has a dry
everything was normal.
floor. He just described how the creek runs into the sinkhole and then down. I described a little bit earlier how in previous millennia the creek had run through the entrance. And I thought, and John thought, that that's the way it was. Back then the water had flowed,
Right.
but not now.
Yeah.
Because we've been in this cave dozens and dozens of times. We've been all over in it. And there was never any water in the passageway where you walk around, you climbing over rocks.
There was some, but like
Tiny bit. And you go down and
most caves have lots of water. This cave had very little.
But actually, it has been raining more than we realized.
Because we were like, under the ground.
We were under the ground. And so the next morning, just as we were all waking up. This is pitch black, by the way.
You can't.
Have any of you ever been in a cave, black, very black? You put your hand in front of your face. No, you cannot
This is
see
not
your
Mammoth Cave where like there's like a ranger who's like, and then they went this way, and there's like lights. There's nothing. I mean, there's no light. It's your light or that's it. You can't see anything.
But we had a lantern going,
Had a lantern.
so that there was a little bit of light. A kerosene lantern will burn for hours and hours and hours if it's got enough fuel in it, and so we had one of those. Waking up in the early morning.
Well, and we should talk about what we spent the evening.
Go ahead.
We
Go ahead.
we drank beer and whiskey and
No, you were underage.
and the adults drank whiskey and we read Edgar Allan Poe to each other and played dominoes.
Yes, and played the bagpipes.
and played the bagpipes. We're inventing as we go here. And so one of the things to kind of understand is that so there's this waterfall at the end of the cave. Like, oh, this is amazing. And then there's these little like side passages, and we had chosen this side passage that was sort of like just sand, so it was comfy to sleep on. And there was like a rock wall. So here's the waterfall, and we kind of went like around this rock wall, and so we couldn't see the waterfall, but we could hear it. So it's just kind of like, it was kind of like being in the womb or something, because I remember this, but it was very soothing, and it was nice. And we had a wonderful evening. We played dominoes and Scrabble and all that stuff, and made dinner, and it was lovely. Everything was fine, and
It was
now-
safe. It
Now that I
wasn't too
think about it,
cold.
what we were going to do for 2 nights in this place. I don't
Tell
know.
stories.
Well, he was telling stories and things, and I was probably reading bad poems or something. A lot like what's going to happen to me.
So it was dry.
So it was very dry, and it was just
We had walked
normal.
through this passage
Yeah,
many
lots of
times.
nothing, and it takes about an hour.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not like if you've been caving, you're doing a lot of squirming, and it's a fairly easy cave. It's a good one if you're a beginner or if you're a bunch of idiots who want to go camping in a cave. So I went to sleep.
We did.
Woke up the next morning.
But let me do a little more if I may
Okay.
before we get to that point. Because as I said, John and I had been in this cave many, many times and thought it was dry because that's the way it had always been. But on this particular occasion, we realized later there had been a lot more rain than we realized. And that at some point, when you get enough rain in just the right place, you get what's known as a flash flood. This is presaging what's about to happen. You get a flash flood. And when that happens, that floor fills up with water, which is why there were pieces of driftwood in it, which we had noticed through the years. And I thought, every now and again I would think, now where did this driftwood go? But somehow it never seeped through into consciousness that maybe you get these
And there was more evidence, like a lot more.
like dead cows. I'm kidding.
He's actually not kidding. There were skeletons.
There were some
lots of things that indicated that this was a bad thing.
But we didn't think that. We were down the bottom. We camped in this cave before without incident. We were down the bottom, which is to say you don't get back out very easily. The entrance part is big and so on, but then there is a little bit of climbing around, getting down into the bottom where the second waterfall is. He's quite right.
And oftentimes the walls of the cave would get pretty steep. So
Yes.
like most of the time it's kind of like this. It would be like this wide, but then sometimes it would be like this wide to where you'd have to go single file. Or you'd have to like clamber up real high and kind of risk falling. But, again,
But we
everything was
good.
cool, man.
We were good.
Yeah.
So we woke up the next morning. I don't know, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever it
Who
was.
knows? It was probably
Pitch black, except of course for the kerosene lantern.
I went to go pee.
In the special pea spot.
And the special pea spot, and
That's
everything was mostly.
You could hear the
normal. You could
waterfall.
hear the water.
Just like it had been.
But I remember feeling a little unsettled.
Because it was louder than usual?
No, I don't know. I just felt,
A premonition, perhaps.
well, maybe I just woke up in a cave in the
Yeah.
dark. I don't know. But I just remember waking up and going to the peace spot and coming back. And you were up, and John and Peter were still groggily sort of emerging from
I
the
think
shade.
I was moving toward the coffee making.
We were
portion.
getting, we were like, you know, and I just remember feeling like something's just not.
Maybe it was a little louder than usual.
Something's just off.
When all of a sudden,
Me and Dad got to the coffee
all of a sudden,
making.
there was this sudden roar of water. Now that had never happened before, so you and I looked at each other and in that moment went, "Oh shit!" And I think John and I went
And
and
I,
looked.
and I said, Dad, you better go look.
That's right.
And you grabbed
Me and-
John,
me
and
and
John,
John, we went to
John's like, you know, what? I'm still in I'm sleeping. And he's going, come on. We gotta go look. What?
And there was water where none had been.
So yeah.
And in that moment, and I could see the water was rising rather rapidly. So what happens to you in that moment? In that moment, has anybody ever been near death other than myself in this room? Okay. Well,
a lot of
I don't know
hands.
what your experience was,
Good
but
job.
what happens to me in those moments is my brain goes into hyperdrive, which is to say, it is now time to take action and save your butt from imminent death. So that's what we did. But in order to do that, that meant we had to get all the way back out again. Which meant
So they went like around the rock wall,
Yeah.
and I was like, I'm sure it's fine. And they were back within 30 seconds, and they were like, we're leaving right now.
we were in right now.
And of course, my friend Peter's like, what's the big deal? I'm like, I think we gotta go. So
He did know how to follow directions. by the way.
it's at one time or another. So we packed up our stuff, but only like this, just, you know, we
I don't
didn't
remember spending much time packing.
we spent maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah.
We finished
Max.
the coffee, did the
That-
press.
no.
No, we didn't do any of that. There's no coffee that morning. So we packed up essentials,
I guess.
and we had backpacks, but we left a bunch of stuff.
We did.
And
Because we went back later and got it.
We went back later and got it,
Yeah.
and we took off.
We took off into the creek, now underground, which was.
So now you're
Here.
walking through a creek.
Now notice, it's here, here, and it can go up to here, and he can go ta-da, ta-da, but not more. The water was rapidly rising, and so I'm.
And it's cold, guys. It's
It's very cold, and it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. This is very frightening stuff, and we're making humor here, but for real, it's very scary stuff.
And for parts of it, we were able to like kind of pick around it. You know, like I
Yeah.
said, like a lot of the time it was like this. So you know, the water would be this high, and we could kind of like get up like here and just kind of pick our way around. It wasn't too bad, but it was.
Yeah,
What we think had happened is that it was at the cave opening, like the water was rising, and then when we heard the sound, that big rush was when the water finally broke open.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was really
That's
moving
a flash
fast,
flood, yeah.
and it was really, I mean, it was like, I'll never forget. This is pitch black, right? All you guys are headlamps, so all you can see is more or less what's in your headlamp and your buddy's headlamps. I will never forget coming around that corner, and you are like, we gotta leave right now, and he's a bit of a safety nut, so I must admit I was kind of like, it can't be that bad. I will never forget coming around that corner, and I mean, we're talking whitewater rapids. I was like, oh shit! Excuse my language if there's anybody here who cares, but I mean, like, it was like, this is serious,
Mhm.
but it was like, okay, if we leave now,
Mhm.
we can't just stay here, so we gotta leave.
Mhm.
And so we're walking through the water. It's cold, but it's not too bad. We're individually doing it.
Well,
you know,
it
we're
might
kind
not have been too bad for you. I was very afraid.
You were very afraid.
I was very afraid.
Scary cat. But like, we're kind of picking our way around, but it's getting higher and higher.
Yes, it is. And I recognized that we would have to get out. There was no getting
Yeah.
safe because then the water would rise and we'd be
Yeah, we
trapped
thought
and
about
so-
we talked about this as we were going. We were like, okay, well, we could find a high shelf and
Yeah.
get up there. But I mean, the water was coming so fast and rising so fast. We were like,
Could be
hell, we
another
don't
week.
know if it could be another week. It could completely fill. We
No.
really this was so unprecedented. We were so surprised. We were so caught up. We were just kind of like, the one thing that we know we've got to do is get out of here.
Exactly. So we linked arms.
Well, so then we were able to pick our way around, and like we were able to go through, and everything was going pretty well. And then we reached this particular spot where it was like, 50 foot long of what I mentioned before. This like high walled. There's no climbing up. You've got to go through what now is a river. And it was up to, on me it was like here, and on him it was here.
Or thereabouts, yeah.
Or here. No. The fish was this big. But no, this is not a big fish. This is not a big fish story. I mean, it was about
It was scary, yes.
So we realized, like, so John is 6'1", I'm 6 foot whatever, and Peter's 6, one.
And I'm 5'3" and 3.
I'm the tallest guy, but all the other guys are like up to here, and then there's Dad.
Yeah.
And so it was like, we can't just. And also, have you guys ever, played with water before? Like it's the most powerful force on Earth, probably, other than like gravity. I mean, it's no joke. You can't just mess with water. And so we realized, if we individually go into this thing, we're done. And we're talking, there are big rocks and everything. We didn't have helmets, because again, this wasn't like a super low cave. Like, you didn't need a helmet. Stupid. So stupid. This is unbelievable. This is the story of four really stupid white guys who are still alive, Corey. And so we were standing there kind of like, what are we going to do? And I was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. John, you're going to get in front. Dad will be behind John. I'll be behind Dad. And Peter, because he's expendable, will be behind me. Poor guy. And we linked arms. Like this. And literally went like...
It's like the monkeys.
Like literally like this. Yep. And I'll never forget, when we stepped out into the water, like it was literally like, and it was like all of us got picked up and swept back. And honestly, if we had tripped in,
We would all have died.
we probably would be dead, and you wouldn't be enjoying this
probably about it.
And we got picked up, and I just remember my whole, like, I remember, like, have you ever had like an experience of weightlessness? It was just like if you've been driving really fast, you go over a little bump, whoa. I remember just like my heart just went woo, and I was just like, we're done. And then boom, we were there, and then we just, like this,
Yeah.
all the way through this long. I mean, it was this long passage.
It was.
I mean, it's 50 feet, but we're talking water up to here on me, up to here on him.
Yeah.
Splashing in the face where it was really hard to breathe. I mean, I really thought,
This was it.
this was probably, I'm only 16,
So,
or 17.
the part, to my mind, that was most poignant was that I'm a father. This is my son, who I'm very proud of, by the way. Also, quick mention, Amy, where are you?
I'm right here.
Your poetry book is great. I've been reading it.
Thank you.
I recommend it. And his
Last harvest.
I'm a father. I'm also a grandfather. You love your children. You care for them. You take them places. This was part of the idea. You take them places where they can be challenged. They can learn, so that when you're gone, they know what to do, including caves, in our case, so on and so forth. So I had always been watching him and lifting him over rocks and so on. It suddenly realized, as we started to get out of the danger zone, so we wasn't just totally terrified anymore, at least I wasn't, I could see the light.
Just barely.
Just barely, and I knew probably we're going to get out now. When I looked behind me, and by this time we'd unlinked arms because it was just easier, and I looked behind me and he was right on me, ready to grab me should the water take me, because you are going to die, probably, and very unlikely that you wouldn't. And there he was, ready to grab me and save my life. And that's the end of my part of the story.
So, there I was, prepared to grab a hold of him if he took off. And it's never really between us. It's stopped. We don't go out and do this stuff. But now in my everyday life, this is what I do. I'm sort of having a little realization here. I tend to be there to sort of grab you in case you're gonna be swept away. And I will never forget when we got through the hard part, because we by then we were like, this is the worst part. It's actually fairly early in the cave, and I will never forget just when I suddenly realized my headlamp wasn't causing the light anymore. It was the light of day coming through the cave, and it's very dim, and we're utterly exhausted. We didn't have rain gear wouldn't have helped much, but we just had tennis shoes and jeans. We weren't expecting to be in the midst of a flooded cave, and just coming around that corner and seeing that thin opening of light, and then trudging forward, and you looked back at me. I remember that, and and by then we were safe, but I was still like, oh my God, are we really safe? And looking back at Peter, and he was just kind of had this big grin on his face, because I don't know, Peter to this day is probably like, it wasn't that big. He's not a writer. And I'll just never forget trudging up and then out of that cave, and it was pouring down rain, and just standing there in the rain, just getting, cleansed, and we just all started laughing. Mm-hmm. Just laughing, hysterically, because, we had survived this certain doom. And there were two, Paul and his son had come to meet us, and they were standing there in the cave entrance, and we said, you don't want to go in there. So that's the story of Lost Creek Cave.
Bravo.